In 1929, the Philadelphia Athletics won 104 games, finished 18 games ahead of the New York Yankees, and beat the Chicago Cubs in the World Series with two of the most dramatic comebacks October has ever seen. And almost nobody remembers them. The 1927 Yankees have been called the greatest team ever assembled. Books have been written about them, documentaries have been made. Every baseball fan alive knows about Murderers Row and Babe Ruth's 60 home runs. The 1927 Yankees are sacred ground. But here is a fact that nobody talks about. No New York Yankees team over any 5-year period, not with Ruth, not with Gehrig, not with DiMaggio, ever had as high a winning percentage as the 1928 through 1932 Philadelphia Athletics. The team that time forgot was actually better than the dynasty everyone worships. They won 3 consecutive pennants. They won 2 consecutive World Series. They had 4 future Hall of Famers in the everyday lineup and another on the mound. And then the Great Depression destroyed them, and baseball pretended they never existed. This is the story of the 1929 Philadelphia Athletics. The team that dethroned the greatest dynasty in baseball history. The team that pulled off the biggest comeback in World Series history. The team that time forgot. Until now. To understand the 1929 Athletics, you have to understand the man who built them. And to understand Connie Mack, you have to understand that he had done all of this before. Cornelius McGillicuddy was born on December 22, 1862, in East Brookfield, Massachusetts. His father was an Irish immigrant who worked in the cotton mills. Connie started working at age 9. He left school after 8th grade. He played professional baseball as a catcher, then became a manager and part owner of the Philadelphia Athletics when the American League was founded in 1901. He would manage the team for 50 seasons. He retired at age 87. He won 3,731 games and lost 3,948. Both numbers are all-time records that will never be broken. Connie Mack managed in a suit, tie, and straw hat. He never wore a baseball uniform. He directed his defense by waving a rolled-up scorecard from the dugout. He called every player by their first name. They called him Mr. Mack. Red Smith, the legendary columnist, wrote that Mack was no bloodless saint or sanctimonious Puritan, but someone tough and human and clever. Mack himself once admitted, "It is more profitable for me to have a team that is in contention for most of the season, but finishes about 4th. A team like that will draw well enough to show a profit, and you do not have to give the players raises when they do not win." That was Connie Mack, a gentleman in a straw hat who was also one of the shrewdest businessmen in sports history. Between 1910 and 1914, Mack built his first dynasty. The Athletics won 4 pennants in 5 years and 3 World Series championships, led by stars like Eddie Collins, Frank Baker, Chief Bender, and Eddie Plank. They were the best team in baseball. Then financial problems forced him to sell his stars. The Federal League, a rival organization, was offering players higher salaries. Mack could not compete. He sold Collins to the White Sox, Baker to the Yankees, and released Plank and Bender. The team plummeted from champions to laughingstock almost overnight. They finished last 7 consecutive seasons from 1915 through 1921. Their 1916 team went 36-117, one of the worst records in American League history. They did not reach 500 again until 1925. Most owners would have given up. Connie Mack was not most owners. But Mack was already rebuilding. He purchased players from minor league clubs, particularly the Baltimore Orioles of the International League, and slowly assembled a roster that would rival anything in baseball. By 1927, his young core was ready. Jimmie Foxx was 20 years old, Al Simmons was 25, Mickey Cochrane was 24, Lefty Grove was 27. The Athletics finished second to the Yankees in both 1927 and 1928. In 27, the Yankees won 110 games and swept the Pittsburgh Pirates in the World Series. Ruth hit 60 home runs. Gehrig drove in 175 runs. Murderer's Row was at its peak. The Athletics finished 19 games back and could only watch. In 28, the roster included 7 future Hall of Famers: Foxx, Simmons, Cochrane, Grove, plus 3 aging legends finishing their careers in Philadelphia. Cobb, the greatest hitter in baseball history, played his final season as an Athletic, collecting the last 114 of his 4,189 career hits. Tris Speaker, the greatest center fielder of his era, played his final 51 games in a Philadelphia uniform. Eddie Collins, one of the smartest players the game had ever seen, was there too. 7 Hall of Famers on one roster, and they still finished 2.5 games behind the Yankees, who swept the Cardinals in the World Series. The message was clear. As long as Ruth and Gehrig were playing at their peak, no one could beat the Yankees, not even a team loaded with Hall of Famers. Then came 1929. The old legends were gone. Cobb and Speaker had retired, but the young stars had matured. Foxx was no longer sitting on the bench. He was ready, and the Athletics were ready to take the throne. The heart of the 1929 Athletics was a lineup that could match the Yankees blow for blow. Al Simmons played left field and hit .365, with 34 home runs and 157 runs batted in, leading the entire American League in runs batted in and beating out Babe Ruth for the title. They called him Bucketfoot Al because he stepped toward third base when he swung, pulling his front foot away from the plate in a motion that every hitting coach in America would have tried to fix. Connie Mack told them to leave him alone. The unconventional swing produced one of the most consistent hitters in baseball history. Simmons would go on to win back-to-back batting titles in 1930 and 1931, hitting .381 and .390. His career batting average was .334. He hit 307 home runs and drove in 1,827 runs. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1953. Jimmie Foxx played first base and was having his breakout season. At 21 years old, finally installed as the everyday starter after years of Mack patiently grooming him on the bench, Foxx hit .354 with 33 home runs and 118 runs batted in. He was built like a Greek god with bulging biceps and a sculpted physique that made him look like he had been carved from marble. His swing generated power that seemed to defy physics. Lefty Gomez, the Yankees pitcher, once said that when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, he found a baseball that Jimmie Foxx hit off me in 1937. Foxx was just getting started. In 1932, he would hit 58 home runs, a record for right-handed hitters that stood for 66 years. In 1933, he would win the Triple Crown. He won back-to-back Most Valuable Player awards. His career numbers, 534 home runs and a .325 average, put him in the conversation as one of the 5 greatest right-handed hitters who ever lived. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1951. Mickey Cochrane caught every important game. He hit .331 with a .406 on base percentage. They called him Black Mike because of his fiery, combative temperament. He was the best hitting catcher in the American League and one of the most intense competitors the game had ever seen. He had won the American League Most Valuable Player award in 1928, and his leadership behind the plate was as valuable as his bat. When Cochrane called a game, pitchers trusted him completely. When he argued with umpires, everyone took a step back. His career batting average was .320, with a .419 on base percentage, numbers that would be outstanding for an outfielder, let alone a catcher. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1947. Bing Miller played right field and hit .331, with 93 runs batted in. He was a quiet professional who did his job without fanfare and delivered when it mattered most. He would hit the most important ball of the entire season in October. Mulehas played center field and hit .313, with 16 home runs and 82 runs batted in. He was fast, reliable, and dangerous in the clutch. He would have two of the most dramatic moments in World Series history within a span of 48 hours. Max Bishop played second base. They called him Camera Eye because he never swung at a bad pitch. His batting average was just .232, but his on-base percentage was .398 because he walked 128 times, the most in the American League. He was the perfect leadoff hitter for a lineup loaded with run producers. Jimmie Dykes played third base and utility roles, hitting .327 with 13 home runs. He would lead the entire team with a .421 batting average in the World Series. Joe Bowley played shortstop. He was the weakest link in the lineup, hitting just .251. But on a team this loaded, it did not matter. As one writer put it, the Athletics could have played a midget at shortstop and still won the pennant. The Athletics' pitching staff was arguably even more dominant than their lineup. They led the American League in runs allowed with just 615, nearly 100 fewer than the next best team. The ace was Lefty Grove, a 6'3" left-hander from Lonaconing, Maryland, a tiny coal mining town in the Appalachian Mountains. Grove had a fastball that nobody could touch. It came out of his hand like a bullet and arrived at the plate before hitters could finish their swing. He went 20-6 with a 2.81 ERA and 170 strikeouts, leading the league in both ERA and strikeouts. He threw so hard that hitters could hear the ball hiss as it crossed the plate. He was also legendarily temperamental. After one loss caused by a teammate's error, Grove tore apart an entire row of clubhouse lockers with his bare hands. He screamed at teammates who made mistakes behind him. He cursed at umpires who missed calls. He was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. But here is the remarkable thing about the 1929 World Series. Mack kept Grove in the bullpen for the entire series. Because 7 of the 8 Cubs starters hit right-handed, Mack decided to start only right-handed pitchers. His best pitcher, the most dominant left-hander in the American League, never started a single game. It was one of the boldest managerial decisions in World Series history, and it worked. Grove would go on to win 31 games and lose just 4 in 1931, one of the greatest seasons any pitcher has ever had. He won 7 consecutive ERA titles. His career record was 300 wins and 141 losses. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1947. But in October of 1929, Connie Mack sat him down and trusted his plan instead. George Earnshaw was the workhorse, going 24-8 with a 3.29 ERA and 149 strikeouts. He was a hard-throwing right-hander who would win 20 or more games in 3 consecutive seasons. In the World Series, Mack would ask him to start on consecutive days. Rube Wahlberg went 18-11 as the third starter. Eddie Rommel, a knuckleball specialist, went 12-2 with a 2.85 ERA. Jack Quinn, who was 46 years old, the oldest regular pitcher in baseball, won 11 games and provided veteran stability. And then there was Howard Aimker, the man nobody expected. The Athletics seized first place early in the season and never looked back. They did not just win the pennant, they obliterated the competition. By the 4th of July, they led the American League by 9.5 games. By August 1st, the lead was 10.5. By September, it was a coronation, not a race. They clinched the pennant with weeks to spare, finishing 18 games ahead of the New York Yankees. Think about what that means. The Yankees still had Babe Ruth, who hit 46 home runs that year. They still had Lou Gehrig, who hit 35 with 126 runs batted in. They were still a very good team, and the Athletics finished 18 games ahead of them. That is not winning a pennant race. That is ending one before it starts. The Athletics scored 901 runs and allowed just 615. A run differential of plus 286. They hit as a team, they pitched as a team, they fielded as a team. Their defense was the best in the American League, turning more double plays and committing fewer errors than any other club. 6 regular hitters batted over 300, Simmons, Foxx, Miller, Cochrane, Dykes, and Haas. The pitching staff had 4 starters with double-digit wins and an ERA that led the league. There was no weakness anywhere on the roster. The dynasty that had dominated baseball for 3 years, Ruth and Gehrig's Yankees, the team that had won back-to-back World Series in 1927 and 1928, had been dethroned, and it was not even close. The Athletics' opponent in the World Series was the Chicago Cubs, who had won the National League pennant with a 98-54 record under manager Joe McCarthy. The Cubs had a fearsome lineup that included future Hall of Famers Rogers Hornsby, who had been traded from Boston that off-season, Hack Wilson, one of the most feared sluggers in the National League, and Kiki Kyler, a fleet-footed outfielder with a dangerous bat. They had scored 982 runs during the regular season, the most in baseball, and hit 139 home runs. Their pitching staff was anchored by Pat Malone, who won 22 games, and Charlie Root, who had won 26 in 1927 and remained one of the most reliable starters in the league. The Cubs had not won a World Series since 1908, a drought that was already 2 decades old. They were hungry, they were talented, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. It started with a secret. In August, with the pennant race all but settled, Connie Mack pulled 35-year-old Howard Aimker aside and told him something devastating. "You are going to be released after the season." Aimker's arm was sore. He had barely pitched all year, finishing with a 7-2 record and just 20 strikeouts in 54 innings. He was a ghost on the roster. Aimker accepted the news, but he had one request. He had pitched in the major leagues since 1915. He had never pitched in a World Series. He asked Mack for the chance. Mack did something that nobody expected. He told Aimker to leave the team for the final weeks of the regular season. Do not travel with the club. Go to the National League parks where the Cubs are playing and scout them from the stands. Sit in the grandstand where nobody will recognize you. Study their hitters. Watch how they react to different pitches. Learn their tendencies, their weaknesses, their blind spots. Memorize everything. And be prepared to start Game 1 of the World Series. Keep it a secret, Mack said. Tell nobody, not the coaches, not the other pitchers, not the press. Nobody. Aimker did exactly as he was told. For weeks, he sat anonymously in National League grandstands, a notebook in his lap, studying every Cubs hitter like a detective building a case. He watched Rogers Hornsby's aggressive early count approach. He noted Hack Wilson's vulnerability to off-speed pitches down and away. He catalogued Kiki Kyler's tendency to chase curveballs. By the time the World Series began, Howard Aimker knew the Cubs lineup better than the Cubs knew themselves. On October 8, 1929, at Wrigley Field in Chicago, the first World Series game ever played at that famous ballpark, Connie Mack shocked both teams by handing the ball to Howard Aimker. The Cubs had prepared for Lefty Grove or George Earnshaw. Instead, they faced a 35-year-old with a sore arm who had not started a meaningful game in months. Mack's choice shocked everyone. Aimker knew every batter's weakness. He had spent weeks studying them from the grandstand. He mixed soft curveballs and sidearm fastballs with the precision of a man who knew this would be the last great game of his career. He pitched a complete game. He gave up 1 run, none of them earned. He struck out 13 batters, breaking the World Series record that had stood since Ed Walsh set it in 1906. The Athletics won 3-1. Connie Mack called it "my greatest thrill in baseball." It remains one of the most famous pitching decisions in the history of the sport. And it was the last win of Howard Aimker's career. Game 2 stayed at Wrigley Field. Earnshaw and Grove combined on the mound. Foxx hit a 3-run home run. Simmons added a 2-run blast. The Athletics won 9-3 and took a 2-0 lead back to Philadelphia. Game 3 was the Cubs' only victory. Pitcher Guy Bush outdueled Earnshaw, who was starting on 1 day's rest, and held the Athletics to 1 run. The Cubs won 3-1. Chicago had life. Then came Game 4, October 12, 1929, Shebe Park, Philadelphia. This game would become the most famous in athletics history. It would become one of the most famous games in baseball history, and it started as a disaster. Mack made a bold decision to start 46-year-old Jack Quinn, the oldest pitcher in baseball. Unlike the Imke gamble, this one backfired immediately. The Cubs pounded Quinn and built an 8-0 lead by the middle innings. The game appeared to be a rout. The series was heading back to Chicago, tied at 2 games each. Then the bottom of the 7th inning happened. What followed was the most improbable rally in World Series history. An inning so dramatic, so chaotic, so unbelievable that the people who watched it could barely describe it afterward. Al Simmons led off with a home run into the left field seats, 8-1. A meaningless gesture, or so it seemed. Then Foxx singled sharply. Miller singled, the crowd stirred. Jimmie singled to drive in a run. 8-2, Joe Boley singled. 8-3, suddenly the tying run was in the on-deck circle and the Cubs were scrambling. Cubs manager Joe McCarthy had seen enough of Charlie Root. He pulled his starter and brought in Art Neff, a veteran lefty, to stop the bleeding. Neff faced Mule Haas. Haas lined Neff's first pitch towards center field, a high fly ball that Hack Wilson drifted back to track. And then the late afternoon sun got in Wilson's eyes. Wilson, who had hit 39 home runs during the regular season and who was one of the best defensive outfielders in the National League, lost the ball completely in the glare. It dropped in front of him, hit the grass, and rolled all the way to the outfield wall. By the time Wilson retrieved it, Haas had circled the bases for an inside-the-park, 3-run home run, 8-7. One swing had turned a 7-run deficit into a 1-run game. Shebe Park erupted into pandemonium. Nearly 30,000 fans were on their feet, screaming, stomping, shaking the old concrete stadium. McCarthy brought in Sheriff Blake. Blake gave up a single and a hit batsman. McCarthy brought in Pat Malone, his best reliever. Malone gave up another single and a ball that skipped under a fielder's glove. By the time the inning was over, the Athletics had scored 10 runs on 10 hits, a walk and a hit batsman. 10 runs in one inning, after trailing 8-0. Final score, Athletics 10, Cubs 8. It remains the biggest single-inning comeback in World Series history. Nearly a century later, no team has ever come back from a larger deficit in a single World Series inning. Connie Mack sat in the dugout in his suit and tie, clutching his scorecard, and watched the most improbable rally in baseball history unfold in front of him. "To my players must go full credit," he wrote the next day. They won the American League pennant brilliantly and did not lag a bit in the World Series. They kept their heads up, fought to the last, and won the big title with the most amazing display of courage in winning games apparently lost that was ever seen. 2 days later, the Athletics finished the job in Game 5, and they did it in a way that mirrored Game 4 so perfectly it seemed scripted. The Cubs took a 2-0 lead into the bottom of the 9th inning. Pat Malone, the same reliever who had failed to stop the bleeding in Game 4, was on the mound. 3 outs from forcing a Game 6 back in Chicago. 3 outs from extending the series and giving the Cubs a chance to recover from the most demoralizing loss in World Series history. Max Bishop led off with a single to right field. Then Mule Haas, the hero of the Game 4 comeback, the man who had hit the inside-the-park home run that changed everything, stepped to the plate again. He hit a 2-run home run over the right field wall to tie the game at 2. The crowd at Shibe Park, which had witnessed the impossible just 48 hours earlier, could not believe it was happening again. After a Mickey Cochrane groundout, Al Simmons ripped a double into the gap. Jimmy Foxx was intentionally walked to set up a force play at any base. Bing Miller, the quiet right fielder who had hit .331 all season without making a single headline, stepped in with runners on first and second, 2 outs, and the World Series on the line. Miller drove a Pat Malone curveball off the scoreboard in right field for a double. Simmons raced around third base and slid home. The umpire's arms spread wide. Safe. The Athletics won 3-2 on a walk-off hit. The Philadelphia Athletics were world champions for the first time since 1913. 16 years of waiting, rebuilding, and believing had paid off. Sheba Park shook with the roar of 30,000 fans who had just watched their team come back from the dead twice in 3 days. The 1929 championship was not the end. It was the beginning of a dynasty. In 1930, the Athletics won 102 games, finished 8 games ahead of the Washington Senators and 16 games ahead of the Yankees, and beat the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series 4-2. Grove won 28 games. Simmons won the batting title at 381. Foxx hit 37 home runs with 156 runs batted in. In 1931, the Athletics were even better during the regular season. They won 107 games, the most of their 3-year run, and finished 13.5 games ahead of the Yankees. Grove went 31-4, one of the greatest seasons any pitcher has ever had. Earnshaw and Wahlberg each won more than 20. But the Cardinals beat them in the World Series in 7 games, led by the electrifying Pepper Martin, who hit .500 and stole 5 bases and willed St. Louis to victory through sheer force of personality. Martin was a wild, reckless player who ran the bases like a man being chased by dogs. And the Athletics had no answer for him. It was the only World Series Connie Mack would ever lose: 3 pennants, 2 championships, 3 consecutive 100-win seasons, the first franchise in baseball history to accomplish that feat. The Athletics had proven they were every bit the equal of Ruth and Gehrig's Yankees. Old-timers who played in that era said the two teams matched up so closely that they were nearly equal, with the Athletics given the nod in fielding and pitching, and the Yankees in hitting. And then the Great Depression destroyed everything. The stock market crashed in October of 1929, the same month the Athletics won the World Series. Over the next 3 years, the American economy collapsed. Unemployment soared, banks failed, businesses closed. Philadelphia was hit particularly hard. Attendance at Sheba Park, which had been 839,000 in 1929, dropped to 405,000 by 1932. Pennsylvania's blue laws prohibited Sunday baseball until 1934, robbing the Athletics of their most profitable day of the week. Banks called in the loans Mack had taken to modernize and expand the stadium. The Athletics had the highest payroll in the league, and Mack could no longer afford to pay it. So he did what he had done once before. He sold his stars one by one. The greatest roster in the American League was auctioned off to the highest bidder, like furniture from a foreclosed home. In September of 1932, he sold Simmons, Dykes, and Haas to the Chicago White Sox for $100,000. 3 players who had helped win 2 World Series gone in one transaction. After the 1933 season, the dismantling accelerated. He sold Grove, Wahlberg, and Bishop to the Boston Red Sox for $125,000 and 2 journeyman players. He sold Cochrane to the Detroit Tigers for $100,000. Cochrane went to Detroit and immediately won 2 pennants and a World Series as a player-manager, proving that Mack had not sold a declining player. He had sold a champion. He dealt Earnshaw to the White Sox for $20,000. And in December of 1935, he completed the dismantling by trading Jimmie Foxx, the most beloved player on the roster, a hometown hero who had grown up on the team and been groomed by Mack since he was 17 years old, to the Red Sox for $150,000 and 2 players. Foxx was devastated. The Philadelphia fans were devastated, but Mack had no choice. The money was gone. Every star was gone. The greatest team of its era had been stripped down to nothing. The total haul for selling a dynasty's worth of Hall of Famers was approximately $500,000. Even in Depression-era money, it was a pittance for what those players were worth. The Athletics fell to 5th place in 1934, then to the cellar in 1935. Between 1935 and 1946, they finished last 9 times in 12 years. Attendance dropped below 300,000. The stadium fell into disrepair. The farm system produced nothing. The dynasty was not just over, it was erased. Mack continued managing until 1950, when he finally retired at 87 years old. He had managed the Athletics for half a century, longer than most franchises had existed. The franchise, crippled by decades of financial mismanagement and dwindling attendance, was sold and moved to Kansas City in 1955. It later moved again to Oakland in 1968. The Philadelphia Athletics ceased to exist. A franchise that had produced 16 Hall of Famers and 5 World Series championships in 54 years was gone from the city that built it. That is why nobody remembers the 1929 Athletics. The Yankees dynasty produced Yankee Stadium, Monument Park, and a franchise that went on to win 27 World Series titles. The Athletics dynasty produced a fire sale, a move to Kansas City, and eventually a move to Oakland. The Yankees became baseball's defining brand. The Athletics became a cautionary tale about what happens when greatness meets poverty. But the numbers do not lie. 104 wins in 1929, 102 in 1930, 107 in 1931, 3 consecutive pennants, 2 consecutive World Series championships, the highest 5-year winning percentage of any team in the American League ever, higher than the Ruth Yankees, higher than the DiMaggio Yankees, higher than the Mantle Yankees, higher than any Yankees team, period. They had a 66-year-old manager in a straw hat who started a pitcher nobody expected and called it his greatest thrill. They had a 21-year-old first baseman who would become one of the 5 greatest right-handed hitters in history. They had a left fielder who hit .365 by stepping away from the plate. They had a catcher who burned so hot they called him Black Mike. They had a left-handed pitcher who threw so hard batters could hear the ball coming. And they came back from 8-0 in the 7th inning of a World Series game, scoring 10 runs in a single inning, the greatest comeback October has ever seen. The 1929 Philadelphia Athletics were not just a great team. They were a dynasty that rivaled the greatest dynasty in baseball history. They beat the Yankees when the Yankees had Ruth and Gehrig. They won when it mattered most, and they kept winning until the economy took away everything they had built. Sports Illustrated was right. They were the team that time forgot. Forgotten because the Great Depression scattered their players to the winds. Forgotten because the franchise left Philadelphia and wandered to Kansas City and then Oakland. Forgotten because the Yankees had better storytellers, bigger stadiums, and a mythology that swallowed everything else in its path. But time has a way of remembering what matters. And the 1929 Philadelphia Athletics matter. They matter because they proved that the greatest dynasty in baseball history could be beaten. They matter because a 66-year-old man in a straw hat outsmarted every manager in the American League. They matter because a 35-year-old pitcher with a sore arm delivered the game of his life when nobody believed he could. They matter because 10 runs in 1 inning is still the most improbable comeback October has ever seen. The team that time forgot. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.